Alright guys, welcome back to another video. I'm sorry this took so long to make, but we're finally here, and today I'm going to be talking about the Safavid Empire. And this is part of a series that I'm doing on the Muslim gunpowder empires, which I think are really interesting. And I'm going to be talking about each of these empires in length in a simplified history video. I can't really go too in depth on them because that would take a lot of effort, and I have a lot of things to do. So these are going to be sort of simplified videos, alright? They're not going to go too far in depth on the empire, and they're not really going to go over specific little events, and it's sort of just going to be a little rundown on the empire's existence, how it fell and its origins, and basically how it rose to power and stuff like that. But yeah, without further ado, let's get straight into the video. The Safavid Empire started out in the city of Ardabil in 1501. And after they started out, they quickly conquered all of Persia. They were able to do this by the religious backing of many tribes in the region, and they were quickly able to subjugate all of them. They didn't really have gunpowder yet, although they did use it a little bit during this time, but it wasn't really major. But that would come later. The Safavid Empire, after conquering all of Persia, quickly looked to form a basic governing system that they really needed. And they sort of copied the Ottomans' homework on this one, and based a lot of institutions on Ottoman ones, and they were essentially very similar to them. They also were a strict meritocracy, and gave out jobs and stuff based on how good you were at something, and basically your merit on it. It was a meritocracy. This was great for the Persians though, or I mean the Safavids, who were able to quickly form an effective military with this system, and also were able to run things efficiently, smoothly, and yeah, it was just great. This essentially started out modern Persia right here. And this new thing that the Safavids introduced, this new governing and the copying of basically Ottoman institutions, made modern Persia. And afterwards, they would continue modernizing Persia and make it even better than it was. During this time, though, there were two other empires around the Safavid Empire. And that was the Ottomans, which they had copied and based a lot of their institutions on, and the other one was the Mughal Empire, who was in India. These empires were on both sides of the Safavids, and since all three of them were both Islamic, you'd think that they would be like friends and not really attack each other, but that couldn't be any further from the truth. No, these empires fought each other ruthlessly, and they sacrificed millions, maybe even more than that. Well, maybe not more than millions, because I don't even know if there was like a million people or like a billion people in the world at this time, but they sacrificed a lot of people, brutally murdering each other, and they hated each other. This was partly due because the Safavids were a different sect of Islam, which was Shia and not Sunni like the Mughals and the Ottomans, and this overall just heightened the tensions between them. Despite this though, the Safavids were able to both fight off the Mughals and the Ottomans at the same time. And during the 1600s, the Safavids started really using gunpowder and introducing it into their military, and they were able to carve out a lot of Ottoman territory during this time. And they managed to take all of Iraq, parts of Syria, the Persian Gulf, and even mainland parts of Turkey from the Ottomans. And they were very good with their military. Sadly though, they wouldn't be able to keep this because the Ottomans were still there, and they were never able to deal a death blow to the Ottomans. But basically all of this territory here, that was the great extent of the Safavid Empire, was sort of a flip-flop between these empires from time to time. The Mughals and the Safavids also fought each other ruthlessly, and played a pretty much great game sort of before the Russian Empire and the British Empire had their great game over Afghanistan. And they fought each other ruthlessly for all this land. It was a sort of back and forth between them, but neither of them could really deal a death blow to each other, and sort of just sacrificed thousands of people fighting little wars over small territories. The Safavids, after this, really started going into their golden age during the 1600s. They had gunpowder now, and by this time they were also doing major trading around the world. And this really made modern Persia here. And without the Safavids, there really wouldn't have been a Persia on the map, or a modern Iran today. It probably would have been divided up between the Mughals or something, or the Ottomans or someone else. So yeah, the Safavids were pretty major. But how exactly did these Safavids even start? Well, they were actually of Kurdish origin, not Azerbaijani, but they did pretty much become Turkish because they married in the Turkish families and other things like that. And they essentially became Turkish over time because of these marriages. And they even did consider themselves Turkish by the 1500s. And they also did start out in the regions of Azerbaijan and Irabili. But they were essentially pretty much still Iranian. It's an interesting mix, but they were basically Iranian, Kurdish, and Turkish. But they didn't really, see themselves as Kurdish because of like how Turkified they were, but they still were. That's really where they started. The Safavids, over the course of their history, fought the Mughals and the Ottomans, and they kept them all at bay. These empires couldn't really get too far into the Safavid Empire, although the Ottomans did defeat them a few times, but they weren't able to deal a death blow to each other, and they fought over the centuries. But this showed how powerful the Safavids were. They fought two empires at the same time, and they were able to defeat them and hold their own against these empires. And they did this for about 200 years, until the 1700s. By the 1700s, things were actually looking better for the Safavid Empire because the Mughal Empire to the east of them had collapsed. And without that, they really could only focus on the Ottomans after this. But unfortunately, this would begin the downfall of the Safavid Empire. The downfall started out because of very incompetent leaders which had risen up over time in the Safavid Empire. And in the 1700s, they had a very incompetent leader who was not ready for the job. During this time, Afghanistan had sort of revolted against Safavid rule, and there was a faction in there called the Hotak dynasty, which invaded them during the 1720s. The Safavid Empire did little to respond to this invasion and didn't really take it very seriously, and this was mainly because of the leaders' incompetence, and they swept through all of Persia. They took pretty much all of it. And this was pretty much a death blow to the Safavid Empire. And after this, the incompetent leader, which didn't do anything about the invasion, was actually killed by the Hotak dynasty. But the damage had already been done to the Safavid Empire, and after this, regions of Iran began revolting, and the Ottomans and the Russian Empire began swooping in to take territory from them. And this was pretty much the end for the Safavid Empire, and they officially pretty much dissolved in 1736. Although they did experience a brief revival during like the 1750s, but Persia at this time had already like turned into a melting pot of chaos after the fall of the Hotaks, and they didn't keep like control over Afghanistan after they killed the the Safavids. And yeah, Persia at this time became an all-out warfare, and the Safavids weren't really able to rise up again, and their brief revival in the 1750s was brief, and they never really rose up after that. Despite this though, the Safavids did do a lot over their 200 years of ruling over Persia, and they had effectively made Iran, modern Iran. There would have been no basis for an Iran if it wasn't for this nation. And the Safavids' impact can still be seen in Iran today, as the country is still Shia, and still a Islamic nation, and still pretty much has the borders that the Safavids made for it, sort of. Although they did change a lot, because they don't really control Azerbaijan anymore, but it's still sort of what the Safavids made. And now, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about for this video. The Safavids were a great empire that had lasted over 200 years, but unfortunately, they were ended because of sort of one incompetent leader, and they still had such a bright future that was ahead of them, and they could have done so much more, and even maybe probably could have made it to the modern day if they just didn't have incompetent leaders like this, but sadly they did, and it caused their downfall. But yeah, that's sort of all I wanted to talk about for this video. This was a brief little going over of the Safavid history, how they rose to power, how they sort of ran things. And yeah, leave a like if you enjoyed this video and want to see more history videos, and If you didn't like this video, tell me in the comments, and I won't make these history videos, and I'll do what you guys actually want me to see, or what you guys want to see. But I don't really know what that is, so I'm just sort of throwing things at the wall, you know? But I'm very interested in these Muslim gunpowder empires, and this is going to be a little series. So after this, stay tuned for the next episode on this. And I don't know when that's coming out because I have research to do on these. But yeah, let me know in the comments if I got anything wrong, and I'll try to research better for the next episode of this. But yeah, this was the Safavid Empire. I hope you guys learned something, and I will see you in the next epic video. Alright, bye.